So, what happens when the government sets a rule for itself and then just completely ignores it? We're going to dive into a court case that's all about that very question, where one taxpayer stood up to the entire state.
Okay, so this whole thing kicks off with a woman named Desi. She gets this tax bill from the Indonesian Directorate General of Taxes, but it's not the bill itself that's the whole story. It's how she got it that ends up in a massive legal battle.
All right, so what are we really talking about here? Well, like a lot of these stories, it all starts with a single piece of paper. And boy, was it a shocker. Get this. The bill was for almost 6.8 billion rupiah. Now, to give you some perspective, that's nearly $500,000 US. I mean, that's the kind of number that just completely turns your world upside down, and not in a good way.
But here's the thing. Desi looked at this and thought, wait a minute, something's not right here. She was convinced the process itself was totally broken. So she didn't just fight the number, she challenged the entire audit's right to even exist.
And what's so fascinating is that her case isn't really about complicated tax math or finding loopholes. Nope, it's all about the calendar. The whole argument, the whole fight, it boils down to a timeline of deadlines that were just missed.
You see, Indonesian law is super clear on this. A field audit is supposed to take 6 months. Okay, maybe you get an extension, but there is a hard stop. So the audit kicks off in August 2023, the first deadline in February 2024, whoosh, right by. Then the absolute final deadline in May. And what happened? Crickets. Nothing. It took them 289 days after that final deadline to finally deliver their findings. Think about that. That's not just a little late. That is nearly a full year overdue. And that one number, 289, that's the bedrock of Desi's entire legal fight. But wait, the plot thickens. It's not just about a missed deadline. During a meeting way later, in March 2025, this whole story takes another really weird turn. So, according to the court documents, the auditors told Desi, "Aman bu, pasti dibantu," which pretty much means, "Don't you worry, ma'am, we're going to help you out." You know, exactly the kind of reassuring thing you'd want to hear. So, hearing that, she's probably feeling relieved, right? Trusting that they're going to handle it fairly, Desi decides to show a little gratitude. It's a pretty common gesture in that part of the world. She gives them what's called an angpal. It's like a small gift of money, 500,000 rupiah for each of the two auditors there. So, 1 million rupiah total. But then, things get really strange. Out of nowhere, there's this alleged verbal request for 490 million rupiah to make the whole thing go away. And get this, no paperwork, no official document, just a verbal demand for a massive sum of money. All this right after that small thank you gift and that promise of help. Okay, so you've got this wildly overdue audit, this weird promise, and this huge verbal demand for money. What do? Well, Desi took them to tax court, and her argument was beautifully simple but incredibly powerful. She basically accused the tax office of ultra-virus. Now, that's a fancy legal term, but all it means is acting beyond your power. Her whole point was that by ignoring their own deadlines, they lost the legal authority to do anything at all. So here's the core of her argument, right? That deadline in the regulations, it's not just a suggestion. It's a hard and fast rule, a legal line in the sand. And the second the tax office stepped over it, their power just evaporated. Poof, gone. Which means, she argued, that the final tax bill they sent her was completely illegal and void. Now, you can bet the tax office had something to say about that. They came back with a completely different take on the whole situation. And this right here, this is the heart of the whole disagreement. On one side, you have the taxpayer saying that that deadline was a brick wall, a non-negotiable legal limit. But the tax office, they saw it more like an internal goal, a performance metric. They argued that a bigger, more important law gave them a 5-year window to issue a tax bill, and that trumps everything else. So their defense was basically this. Look, the only deadline that really matters is the 5-year one in the main tax law. That's our real authority. They said a tax bill can only be canceled for 2 specific reasons, and we didn't do either of those. So that other deadline we missed, that's an internal problem. Maybe an employee gets disciplined, but it's got nothing to do with the legality of the tax bill we sent you. And that's when you realize this case is about so much more than one person's tax bill. It really puts the entire idea of the rule of law under a microscope.
It really boils down to this one huge question. What's the real power of a deadline that the government sets for itself? Are those rules real, solid protections for us, the citizens, to make sure things are fair? Or are they just flexible guidelines for the people in charge?
When it comes down to it, this whole case shines a spotlight on this massive tension, right? The citizens' right to a fair, predictable process versus the state's undeniable power to collect taxes. And it leaves us with this really nagging question. When the government writes a rule, is it a promise to its people, or is it just a suggestion for its own employees?